think what NATO can do is signal that it's ready and willing to accept Ukraine as a member, that it will defend it in future once it is a member, and it will set up machinery now between Ukraine and NATO, a joint council that will help Ukraine deal with NATO and hopefully, access NATO weaponry, NATO missiles and shells on a much faster and consistent basis than the rather piecemeal supply that Ukraine has had so far. So, there is plenty to do in Vilnius for the NATO leaders to send Ukraine a positive signal that they are going to join, that's agreed. The timing isn't quite certain yet, but that they are going to join, and that one day they will enjoy the protection that we all enjoy of that collective self-defense once you're inside the NATO shield.
Stake here. I mean, NATO summits come and NATO summits go, but some actually do stand out in terms of extreme relevance to our times. Is this one of them?
Yes, good afternoon, Maria. I think it is one of them. I've attended 3 of these, but I think this is uniquely important. They have to decide how to help Ukraine regain the territory that it's lost to the Russian invasion. They have to decide how to secure Ukraine's borders in future by making it a member of NATO. And I think they also have to urgently review their deterrence, how you strengthen the eastern frontier of NATO to make sure that Russia doesn't do this ever again. Russia's already invaded Georgia. It's caused trouble in Moldova. And of course, now it's invaded Ukraine twice in the last 10 years. So there's plenty for the NATO summit to engage with. But probably top of the list is Ukraine.
And if Ukraine is top of the list, what about this issue of cluster bombs, which obviously are banned by most nations on Earth, though not, I think, America are not signatories, nor are Russia or Ukraine. How controversial is this?
Well, they are controversial, which is why they're banned by many militaries. But Russia, of course, has been using weapons against civilians. It's been firing its missiles against clinics, against nurseries, against private flats, against shopping centres, quite indiscriminately and contrary to all the laws of war. So Ukraine is perfectly entitled to continue defending itself and to ask its allies for help in defending itself. And there aren't weapons that aren't lethal. The key, of course, is whether you're using them against civilians or not. Now, Ukraine won't do that, but Russia is. And somehow Ukraine has to be able to defend itself and to fight back and protect its own civilians. So it's fully entitled to do that.
But isn't there a conundrum there in us being seen to support someone who is supporting a weapon that we absolutely, don't feel should be used in the field of war?
Yes, NATO has 31 members and very big militaries, the United States, ourselves and France, and we all have a slightly different approach to weaponry and the kind of weapons that we're going to supply. But let me make a slightly different point. If we'd given Ukraine from the start the kind of air support that they desperately needed and enough missiles for missile defense, then we wouldn't have forced Ukraine to fight this kind of trench warfare, rather like the First World War in dealing with the Russian invasion. So it's important to recognize that Ukraine is defending its own civilians, defending its own territory. And if the Ukrainian military think cluster bombs directed against Russian military would help, then we shouldn't be arguing.
So do you think that Biden and Sunak are going to agree to disagree?
Yes, I think that happens. This is a huge organization, as I said, 31 different members, all taking slightly different views on who they will sell arms to and different views of these international conventions. And on this one, I think they will simply disagree. But, they have to get on with the bigger picture, which is how do you help Ukraine win this war? How do you step up the supply of shells and missiles that the Ukrainian army desperately needs? And then how do you get Ukraine into NATO and behind the defensive line, if you like, and secure its borders for the future? Those actually are the much bigger issues rather than the supply of any particular weapon.
And how do you get Ukraine into NATO? Will of course be the big topic being debated, but Ukraine can't join NATO, can it? While it's engaged in an active war, isn't that the fundamental issue?
Yes, and they can't join NATO tomorrow or today or tomorrow because the war is still there. But I think what NATO can do is signal that it's ready and willing to accept Ukraine as a member, that it will defend it in future once it is a member, and it will set up machinery now between Ukraine and NATO, a joint council that will help Ukraine deal with NATO and hopefully, access NATO weaponry, NATO missiles and shells on a much faster and consistent basis than the rather piecemeal supply that Ukraine has had so far. So, there is plenty to do in Vilnius for the NATO leaders to send Ukraine a positive signal that they are going to join, that's agreed. The timing isn't quite certain yet, but that they are going to join and that one day they will enjoy the protection that we all enjoy of that collective self-defense once you're inside the NATO shield.
So, Michael Fallon, former Defence Secretary, thank you very much for joining me.